In the last episode, Gully and Jisbella had arrived at their destination, the Sargasso Asteroid, the one from where he had escaped Joseph and his so-called scientific people. They had rescued him from the wreck of the ship Nomad and made him one of them by giving him the facial tattoos he had finally just had removed. Hiding their ship in a crater, the crater Gully had made when he blasted out of the asteroid, Foyle and Jisbella put on spacesuits and managed to locate the Nomad, now firmly embedded into the asteroid by Joseph's people. Encountering Joseph and his people, Foyle's rage burned, and he declined the invitation to follow the leader back into the safety of the asteroid. Jisbella was shocked by what she saw. On returning to their ship, Jisbella, determined to show Gully what she has discovered, insults and slaps him. He responds with rage and is immediately confronted by his reflection in a hand mirror that Jisbella put in front of him. The tattoo marks that Baker had removed were now visible. His markings were still there as surgical scars, but now showed only under emotional intensity, glowing blood red with increased blood flow rather than the original black. Jisbella tells him that he now has a reason to learn self-control, one that will be with him for life. As he unwillingly absorbs this truth, Foyle recovers his resolve to return to Nomad with tools to retrieve its treasure. It becomes apparent that he must enter the asteroid in search of the tools he will need. He accomplishes this task with brute force, fighting off the outraged scientific people. He returns to Nomad to begin working on the safe when Jisbella alerts him that Dagenham and his men have arrived. His appearance confirms that the safe contains a fortune. They have no time to open the safe and transport its contents to their ship. Their only option is to take the safe with him. Foyle beckons Jisbella to join him on Nomad. After cutting the safe loose from the ship, they are unable to budget. Jisbella works out a plan. One of them will pilot their ship and the other will guide the pilot into position to catch the safe in its hatch. Jisbella decides that Gully should pilot while she is left to light the explosives that will propel the safe into space to meet its destination. Foyle returns to their ship, flies it out of the crater, and locates it near the Nomad, where Dagenham's soldiers are now starting to swarm. Their plan works, almost. The safe blasts out into space and is caught dead center in the ship's hatch. Under attack, Jisbella tries to return to their ship, but finds that the safe is jammed into the hatch, blocking it. She is unable to enter and pleads for help from Foyle. Meanwhile, Foyle sees Dagenham's ship approaching and hears several soldiers trying to board. Impelled by fear and compelled by rage and his obsession, Foyle utters a single word, Vorga, and rockets away, leaving Jisbella at the mercy of Dagenham. Fainting under the high G-forces, only Foyle's face betrays his emotional state. His scars are glowing blood red. This ends part one of the story. What is in store for Gully Foyle next? What does he have in store for his enemies? What is Gully Foyle going to inflict on an unsuspecting world in his quest for revenge? Find out in part 2, episode 9 of The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester.
With a heart of furious fancies, whereof I am commander, with a burning spear and a horse of air, to the wilderness I wander. With a night of ghosts and shadows, I summoned am to tourney, 10 leagues beyond the wide world's end. Methinks it is no journey. From Tam o' Bedlam by an unknown poet.
The old year soured as pestilence poisoned the planets. The war gained momentum and grew from a distant affair of romantic raids and skirmishes in space to a holocaust in the making. It became evident that the last of the world wars was done and the first of the solar wars had begun. The belligerents slowly massed men and materiel for the havoc. The outer satellites introduced universal conscription, and the inner planets perforce followed suit. Industries, trades, sciences, skills, and professions were drafted. Regulations and oppressions followed. The armies and navies requisitioned and commanded. Commerce obeyed, for this war, like all wars, was the shooting phase of a commercial struggle. But populations rebelled, and draft jaunting and labor jaunting became critical problems. Spy scares and invasion scares spread. The hysterical became informers and lynchers. An ominous foreboding paralyzed every home from Baffin Island to the Falklands. The dying year was enlivened only by the advent of the 4-mile circus. This was the popular nickname for the grotesque entourage of Geoffrey 4-Mile of Ceres, a wealthy young buffoon from the largest of the asteroids. 4-Mile of Ceres was enormously rich. He was also enormously amusing. He was the classic nouveau riche of all time. His entourage was a cross between a country circus and the comic court of a Bulgarian kinglet, as witnessed this typical arrival in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Early in the morning, a lawyer wearing the stovepipe hat of a legal clan appeared with a list of campsites in his hand and a small fortune in his pocket. He settled on a 4-acre meadow facing Lake Michigan and rented it for an exorbitant fee. He was followed by a gang of surveyors from the Mason and Dixon clan. In 20 minutes, the surveyors had laid out a campsite, and the word had spread that the 4-Mile circus was arriving. Locals from Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota came to watch the fun. 20 roustabouts jaunted in, each carrying a tent pack on his back. There was a mighty overture of bawled orders, shouts, curses, and the tortured scream of compressed air. 20 giant tents ballooned upward, and their lac and latex surfaces gleaming as they dried in the winter sun. The spectators cheered. A 6-motor helicopter drifted down and hovered over a giant trampoline. Its belly opened, and a cascade of furnishings came down. Servants, valets, chefs, and waiters jaunted in. They furnished and decorated the tents. The kitchens began smoking, and the odor of frying, broiling, and baking pervaded the camp. 4-Mile's private police were already on duty, patrolling the 4 acres, keeping the huge crowd of spectators back. Then, by plane, by car, by bus, by truck, by bike, and by jaunt, came 4-Mile's entourage. Librarians and books, scientists and laboratories, philosophers, poets, athletes. Racks of swords and sabers were set up, and judo mats and a boxing ring. A 50-foot pool was sunk in the ground and filled by pump from the lake. An interesting altercation arose between 2 beefy athletes as to whether the pool should be warmed for swimming or frozen for skating. Musicians, actors, jugglers, and acrobats arrived. The uproar became deafening. A crew of mechanics melted a grease pit and began revving up 4-Mile's collection of vintage diesel harvesters. Last of all came the camp followers: wives, daughters, mistresses, whores, beggars, chiselers, and grafters. By mid-morning, the roar of the circus could be heard for 4 miles, hence the nickname. At noon, 4-Mile of Ceres arrived with a display of conspicuous transportation so outlandish that it had been known to make 7-year melancholics laugh. A giant amphibian thrummed up from the south and landed on the lake. An LST barge emerged from the plain and droned across the water to the shore. Its forward wall banged down into a drawbridge, and out came a 20th century staff car. Wonder piled on wonder for the delighted spectators, for the staff car drove a matter of 20 yards to the center of camp and then stopped.
What can possibly come next? Bike?
No, roller skates.
Oh, he'll come out on a pogo stick.
4-Mile capped their wildest speculations. The muzzle of a circus cannon thrust up from the staff car. There was the bang of black powder explosion, and 4 Mile of Ceres was shot out of the cannon in a graceful arc to the very door of his tent, where he was caught in a net by 4 valets. The applause that greeted him could be heard for 6 miles. 4 Mile climbed onto his valet's shoulders and motioned for silence.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. Damn!
4 white doves shook themselves out of 4 Mile's sleeves and fluttered away. He regarded them with astonishment, then continued.
Friends, greetings, salutations, bonjour, bon temps, bon vivant, bon voyage. Bon, what the hell?
4 Mile's pockets caught fire and rocketed forth Roman candles. He tried to put himself out. Streamers and confetti burst from him.
Friends, shut up, I'll get the speech straight. Quiet. Friends,
4 Mile looked down at himself in dismay. His clothes were melting away, revealing lurid scarlet underwear.
Kleinman, what's happened to your goddamn hypno training?
A hairy head thrust out of a tent.
You studied for this speech last night, 4 Mile?
Damn right. For 2 hours I studied. Never took my head out of the hypno oven. Kleinman on prestidigitation.
No. How many times must I tell you? Prestidigitation is not speech making. It's magic. Dummkopf, you have the wrong hypnosis taken.
The scarlet underwear began melting. 4 Mile toppled from the shoulders of his shaking valets and disappeared within his tent. There was a roar of laughter and cheering, and the 4 Mile circus ripped into high gear. The kitchen sizzled and smoked. There was a perpetuity of eating and drinking. The music never stopped. The vaudeville never ceased. Inside his tent, 4 Mile changed his clothes, changed his mind, changed again, undressed again, kicked his valets, and called for his tailor in a bastard tongue of French, Mayfair, and affectation. Halfway into a new suit, he recollected he had neglected to bathe. He slapped his tailor, ordered 10 gallons of scent to be decanted into the pool, and was stricken with poetic inspiration. He summoned his resident poet.
Take this down. Le roi est mort. Wait, what rhymes to moon?
June, croon, soon, dune, loon, noon, rune, tune, boon.
I forgot my experiment! Dr. Bohun!
Half naked, he rushed pell-mell into the laboratory, where he blew himself and Dr. Bohun, his resident chemist, halfway across the tent. As the chemist attempted to raise himself from the floor, he found himself seized in a most painful and embarrassing stranglehold.
Noguchi! Hi, Noguchi! I just invented a new judo hold.
4 Mile stood up, lifted the suffocating chemist, and jaunted to the judo mat, where Noguchi inspected the hold and shook his head.
No, please. Pressure on windpipe are not perpetually lethal. I show you, please.
He seized the dazed chemist, whirled him, and deposited him on the mat in a position of perpetual self-strangulation.
You observe, please, 4 Mile.
But 4 Mile was in the library, bludgeoning his librarian over the head with blocks des sexual Leben, 8 pounds, 9 ounces, because that unhappy man could produce no text on the manufacture of perpetual motion machines. He rushed to his physics laboratory, where he destroyed an expensive chronometer to experiment with cogwheels, jaunted to the bandstand, where he seized a baton and led the orchestra into confusion, put on skates and fell into the scented swimming pool, was hauled out, swearing fulminously at the lack of ice, and was heard to express a desire for solitude.
I wish to commune with myself.
4 Mile kicked his valets in all directions. He was snoring before the last of them limped to the door and closed it behind him. The snoring stopped, and Foyle arose.
That ought to hold them for today.
He went into his dressing room. He stood before a mirror, took a deep breath, and held it, meanwhile watching his face. At the expiration of 1 minute, it was still untainted. He continued to hold his breath, maintaining rigid control over pulse and muscle, mastering the strain with iron calm. At 2 minutes and 20 seconds, the stigmata appeared, blood red. Foyle let out his breath. The tiger mask faded.
Better. Much better. The old fakir was right. Yoga is the answer. Control. Pulse, breath, bowels, brains.
He stripped and examined his body. He was in magnificent condition, but his skin still showed delicate silver seams in a network from neck to ankles. It looked as though someone had carved an outline of the nervous system into Foyle's flesh. The silver seams were the scars of an operation that had not yet faded. The operation had cost Foyle a 400,000 bribe to the chief surgeon of the Mars Commando Brigade and had transformed him into an extraordinary fighting machine. Every nerve plexus had been rewired. Microscopic transistors and transformers had been buried in muscle and bone. A minute platinum outlet showed at the base of his spine. To this, Foyle affixed a power pack the size of a pea and switched it on. His body began an internal electronic vibration that was almost mechanical.
More machine than man.
He dressed, rejected the extravagant apparel of 4 Mile of Series for the anonymous black coverall of action. He jaunted to Robin Wensbury's apartment in the lonely building amidst the Wisconsin pines. It was the real reason for the advent of the 4 Mile Circus in Green Bay. He jaunted and arrived in darkness and empty space and immediately plummeted down.
Wrong coordinates. Misjaunted?
The broken end of a rafter dealt him a bruising blow, and he landed heavily on a shattered floor upon the putrefying remains of a corpse. Foyle leapt up in calm revulsion. He pressed hard with his tongue against his right upper first molar. The operation that had transformed half his body into an electronic machine had located the control switchboard in his teeth. Foyle pressed a tooth with his tongue, and the peripheral cells of his retina were excited into emitting a soft light. He looked down in 2 pale beams at the corpse of a man. The corpse lay in the apartment below Robin Wensbury's flat. It was gutted. Foyle looked up. Above him was a 10-foot hole where the floor of Robin's living room had been. The entire building stank of fire, smoke, and rot.
Jacked. This place has been jacked. What happened?
The jaunting age had crystallized the hobos, tramps, and vagabonds of the world into a new class. They followed the night from east to west, always in darkness, always in search of loot, the leavings of disaster, carrion. If earthquake shattered a warehouse, they were jacking it the following night. If fire opened a house or explosion split the defenses of a shop, they jaunted in and scavenged. They called themselves jack jaunters. They were jackals. Foyle climbed up through the wreckage to the corridor on the floor above. The jack jaunters had a camp there. A whole calf roasted before a fire, which sparked up to the sky through a rent in the roof. There were a dozen men and 3 women around the fire, rough, dangerous, jabbering in the Cockney rhyming slang of the jackals. They were dressed in mismatched clothes and drinking potato beer from champagne glasses. An ominous growl of anger and terror met Foyle's appearance as the big man in black came up through the rubble, his intent eyes emitting pale beams of light. Calmly, he strode through the rising mob to the entrance of Robin Wensbury's flat. His iron control gave him an air of detachment.
If she's dead, I'm finished. I've got to use her. But if she's dead...
Robin's apartment was gutted like the rest of the building. The living room was an oval of floor around the jagged hole in the center. Foyle searched for a body. 2 men and a woman were in the bed in the bedroom. The men cursed. The woman shrieked at the apparition. The men hurled themselves at Foyle. He backed a step and pressed his tongue against his upper incisors. Neural circuits buzzed, and every sense and response in his body was accelerated by a factor of 5. The effect was an instantaneous reduction of the external world to extreme slow motion. Sound became a deep garble. Color shifted down the spectrum to the red. The two assailants seemed to float toward him with dreamlike languor. To the rest of the world, Foyle became a blur of action. He sidestepped the blow, inching toward him, walked around the man, raised him, and threw him toward the crater in the living room. He threw the second man after the first jackal. To Foyle's accelerated senses, their bodies seemed to drift slowly, still in mid-stride, fists inching forward, open mouths emitting heavy, clotted sounds. Foyle whipped to the woman cowering in the bed.
Was there a body?
The woman shrieked. Foyle pressed his upper incisors again, cutting off the acceleration. The external world shook itself out of slow motion back to normal. Sound and color leapt up the spectrum, and the two jackals disappeared through the crater and crashed into the apartment below.
Was there a body? A young black woman?
The woman was unintelligible. He took her by the hair and shook her, then hurled her through the crater in the living room floor. The search for a clue to Robin's fate was interrupted by the mob from the hall. They carried torches and makeshift weapons. The jackjaunters were not professional killers. They only worried defenseless prey to death.
Don't bother me.
Foyle warned, while ferreting intently through closets and under overturned furniture. They edged closer, goaded by a ruffian in a mink suit and a tri-cornered hat, and inspired by the curses percolating up from the floor below. The man in the tricorn threw a torch at Foyle. It burned him. Foyle accelerated again, and the jack-jaunters were transformed into living statues. Foyle picked up half a chair and calmly clubbed the slow-motion figures. They remained upright. He thrust the man in the tricorn down on the floor and knelt on him. Then he decelerated. Again, the external world came to life. The jackals dropped in their tracks, poleaxed. The man in the tricorn hat and mink suit roared.
Was there a body in here? Black woman. Very tall. Very beautiful.
The man writhed and attempted to gouge Foyle's eyes.
You keep track of bodies. Some of you jacks like dead girls better than live ones. Did you find her body in here?
Receiving no satisfactory answer, he picked up a torch and set fire to the mink suit. He followed the jack-jaunter into the living room and watched him with detached interest. The man howled, toppled over the edge of the crater, and flamed down into the darkness below.
Was there a body?
Foyle shook his head at the answer.
Not very deft. I've got to learn how to extract information. Dagenham could teach me a thing or two.
He switched off his electronic system and jaunted. He appeared in Green Bay, smelling so abominably of singed hair and scorched skin that he entered the local press stain shop, jewels, perfumes, cosmetics, ionics, and surrogates, to buy a deodorant. But the local Mr. Presto had evidently witnessed the arrival of the 4-mile circus and recognized him. Foyle at once awoke from his detached intensity and became the outlandish 4-mile of Ceres. He clowned and cavorted, bought a 12-ounce flagon of O number 5 at 100 the ounce, dabbed himself delicately, and tossed the bottle into the street to the edification and delight of Mr. Presto. The record clerk at the county record office was unaware of Foyle's identity and was obdurate and uncompromising.
No, sir. County records are not viewed without proper court order for sufficient cause. That must be final.
Foyle examined him keenly and without rancor.
Athenic type, slender, long-boned, no strength, epileptoid character, self-centered, pedantic, single-minded, shallow, not bribable, too repressed and straight-laced, but repression's the chink in his armor.
An hour later, 6 followers from the 4-mile circus waylaid the record clerk. They were of the female persuasion and richly endowed with vice. 2 hours later, the record clerk, dazed by flesh and the devil, delivered up his information. The apartment building had been opened to jack-jaunting by a gas explosion 2 weeks earlier. All tenants had been forced to move. Robin Wensbury was in protective confinement in Mercy Hospital near the Iron Mountain Proving Grounds.
Protective confinement? What for? What's she done?
It took 30 minutes to organize a Christmas party in the 4 Mile Circus. It was made up of musicians, singers, actors, and rabble who knew the Iron Mountain coordinates. Led by their chief buffoon, they jaunted up with music, fireworks, firewater, and gifts. They paraded through the town, spreading largesse and laughter. They blundered into the radar field of the Proving Ground protection system and were driven out with laughter. 4 Mile of Ceres, dressed as Santa Claus, scattering banknotes from a huge sack over his shoulder and leaping in agony as the induction field of the protection system burned his bottom, made an entrancing spectacle. They burst into Mercy Hospital, following Santa Claus, who roared and cavorted with the detached calm of a solemn elephant. He kissed the nurses, made drunk the attendants, pestered the patients with gifts, littered the corridors with money, and abruptly disappeared when the happy rioting reached such heights that the police had to be called. Much later, it was discovered that a patient had disappeared too, despite the fact that she had been under sedation and was incapable of jaunting. As a matter of fact, she departed from the hospital inside Santa's sack. Foyle jaunted with her over his shoulder to the hospital grounds. There, in a quiet grove of pines under a frosty sky, he helped her out of the sack. She wore severe white hospital pajamas and was beautiful. He removed his own costume, watching the girl intently, waiting to see if she would recognize him and remember him. She was alarmed and confused. Her telesending was like heat lightning.
My God, who is he? What's happened? The music, the uproar. Why kidnapped in a sack? Drunk, slurring on trombones. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, Adeste Fidelis. What's he want from me? Who is he?
I'm 4 Mile of Ceres.
What? Who? 4 Mile of... Yes, of course, the buffoon, the bourgeois gentilhomme, vulgarity, imbecility, obscenity, the 4 Mile Circus. My God, am I telesending? Can you hear me?
I hear you, Miss Wensbury.
What have you done? Why? What do you want from me?
I want you to look at me. Bonjour, madame. Into my sack, madame. Echo. Look at me.
I'm looking.
Robin was trying to control the jangle of her thoughts. She gazed up into his face without recognition.
It's a face. I've seen so many like it. The faces of men. Oh, God, the features of masculinity. Every man in rut. Will God never save us from brute desire?
My rutting season's over, Miss Wensbury.
Oh, I'm sorry you heard that. I'm terrified, naturally. You know me?
I know you.
We've met before?
She scrutinized him closely, but still without recognition. Deep down inside Foyle, there was a surge of triumph. If this woman of all women failed to remember him, he was safe, provided he kept blood and brains and face under control.
We've never met. I've heard of you. I want something from you. That's why we're here, to talk about it. If you don't like my offer, you can go back to the hospital.
You want something? But I've got nothing. Nothing. Nothing's left but shame and, oh, God, why did the suicide fail? Why couldn't I?
So that's it. You tried to commit suicide, eh? That accounts for the gas explosion that opened the building. And your protective confinement. Attempted suicide. Why weren't you hurt in the explosion?
So many were hurt. So many died. But I didn't. I'm unlucky, I suppose. I've been unlucky all my life.
Why suicide?
I'm tired. I'm finished. I've lost everything. I'm on the Army gray list, suspected, watched, reported. No job, no family, no. Why suicide? Dear God, what else but suicide?
You can work for me.
I can? What did you say?
I want you to work for me, Miss Winsbury.
For you? Another camp follower in the circus? Work for you, 4 Mile?
You've got sex in the brain. I'm not looking for tarts. They look for me as a rule.
I'm sorry. I'm obsessed by the brute who destroyed me. I'll try to make sense.
Robin calmed herself.
Let me understand you. You've taken me out of the hospital to offer me a job. You've heard of me. That means you want something special. My specialty is telesending.
And charm.
What?
I want to buy your charm, Miss Winsbury.
I don't understand.
Why, it ought to be simple for you. I'm the buffoon. I'm vulgarity, imbecility, obscenity. That's got to stop. I want you to be my social secretary.
You expect me to believe that? You could hire 100 social secretaries, 1,000 with your money. You expect me to believe that I'm the only one for you? That you had to kidnap me from protective confinement to get me?
Foyle nodded.
That's right, there are thousands, but only one that can telesend.
What's that got to do with it?
You're going to be the ventriloquist. I'm going to be your dummy. I don't know the upper classes. You do. They have their own talk, their own jokes, their own manners. If a man wants to be accepted by them, he's got to talk their language. I can't, but you can. You'll talk for me through my mouth.
But you could learn.
No, it would take too long, and charm can't be learned. I want to buy your charm, Miss Winsbury. Now, about salary, I'll pay you $1,000 a month.
Her eyes widened.
You're very generous, 4 Mile.
I'll clean up this suicide charge for you.
You're very kind.
And I'll guarantee to get you off the Army Gray List. You'll be back on the White List by the time you finish working for me. You can start with a clean slate and a bonus. You can start living again.
Robin's lips trembled, and then she began to cry. She sobbed and shook, and Foyle had to steady her.
Well, will you do it?
She nodded.
You're so kind. I'm not used to kindness anymore.
The dull concussion of a distant explosion made Foyle stiffen.
Christ! Another Blue John.
No, I don't know what Blue John is, but that's the proving ground.
She looked up at Foyle's face and screamed. The unexpected shock of the explosion and the vivid chain of associations had wrenched loose his iron control. The blood-red scars of tattooing showed under his skin. She stared at him in horror, still screaming. He touched his face once, then leapt forward and gagged her. Once again, he had hold of himself.
It shows, huh?
He murmured with a ghastly smile.
I lost my grip for a minute. Thought I was back in Gouffre Martel listening to a blue jaunt. Yes, I'm Foyle, the brute who destroyed you. You had to know, sooner or later, but I'd hoped it would be later. I'm Foyle, back again. Will you be quiet and listen to me?
She shook her head frantically, trying to struggle out of his grasp. With detached calm, he punched her jaw. Robin sagged. Foyle picked her up, wrapped her in his coat, and held her in his arms, waiting for consciousness to return. When he saw her eyelids flutter, he spoke again.
Don't move or you'll be sick. Maybe I didn't pull that punch enough.
Brute. Beast.
I could do this the wrong way. I could blackmail you. I know your mother and sisters are on Callisto, that you're classed as an alien belligerent by association. That puts you on the blacklist, ipso facto. Is that right? Ipso facto? By the very fact. Latin. You can't trust hypno-learning. I could point out that all I have to do is send anonymous information to Central Intelligence, and you wouldn't be just suspect anymore. They'd be ripping information out of you inside 12 hours.
He felt her shudder.
But I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to tell you the truth because I want to turn you into a partner. Your mother's in the inner planets. She's in the inner planets. She may be on Terra.
Safe.
I don't know.
Put me down.
You're cold.
Put me down.
He set her on her feet.
You destroyed me once. Are you trying to destroy me again?
No. Will you listen?
She nodded.
I was lost in space. I was dead and rotting for 6 months. A ship came up that could have saved me. It passed me by. It let me die. A ship named Vorga. Vorga T-1339. Does that mean anything to you? Bill McQueen, a friend of mine who's dead now, once told me to find out why I was left to rot. That would be the answer to who gave the order. So I started buying information about Vorga. Any information.
What's that got to do with my mother?
Just listen. Information was tough to buy. The Vorga records were removed from the bonus and wig files. I managed to locate 3 names. 3 out of a standard crew of 4 officers and 12 men. Nobody knew anything, or nobody would talk. And I found this.
Foyle took a silver locket from his pocket and handed it to Robin.
It was pawned by some spaceman off the Vorga. That's all I could find out.
Robin uttered a cry and opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was her picture and the pictures of 2 other girls. As the locket was opened, the 3D photos smiled and whispered,
Love from Robin, Mama. Love from Holly, Mama. Love from Wendy, Mama.
It is my mother's. She, for pity's sake, where is she? What happened?
I don't know, but I can guess. I think your mother got out of that concentration camp, one way or another.
And my sisters, too? She'd never leave them.
Maybe your sisters, too. I think Vorga was running refugees out of Callisto. Your family paid with money and jewelry to get aboard and be taken to the inner planets. That's how a spaceman off the Vorga came to pawn this locket.
Then where are they?
I don't know. Maybe they were dumped on Mars or Venus. Most probably they were sold to a labor camp on the moon, which is why they haven't been able to get in touch with you. I don't know where they are, but Vorga can tell us.
Are you lying? Tricking me?
Is that locket a lie? I'm telling the truth. All the truth I know. I want to find out why they left me to die and who gave the order. The man who gave the order will know where your mother and sisters are. He'll tell you before I kill him. He'll have plenty of time. He'll be a long time dying.
Robin looked at him in horror. The passion that gripped him was making his face once again show the scarlet stigmata. He looked like a tiger closing in for the kill.
I got a fortune to spend. Never mind how I got it. I got 3 months to finish the job. I learned enough math to compute the probabilities. 3 months is the outside before they figure out that 4 mile of series is Gully Foyle. 90 days from New Year's to All Fools. Will you join me?
You? Join you?
All this 4 mile circus is camouflage. Nobody ever suspects a clown. But I've been studying, learning, preparing for the finish. All I need now is you.
Why?
I don't know where the hunt is going to lead me. Society or slums. I got to be prepared for both. The slums I can handle alone. I haven't forgotten the gutter. But I need you for society. Will you come with me?
You're hurting me.
Robin wrenched her arm out of Foyle's grasp.
Sorry. I lose control when I think about Vorga. Will you help me find Vorga and your family?
I hate you. I despise you. You're rotten. You destroy everything you touch. Someday I'll pay you back.
But we work together from New Year's to All Fools?
We work together.
End of episode 9.